Hey everyone! Before we begin season 4 of Pod and Prejudice, we want to thank our newest patrons Elena, Rachel, Margaret, Rebecca, Heather, Diana, and Holly. Welcome to the team. And a huge shout out to our patrons Joanna and Charlie who upgraded their pledges. If you're interested in hearing Becca's very first thoughts on Persuasion, getting the opportunity to submit your own study questions, and being a part of our awesome Discord community, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/podandprejudice. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, let's dive into season 4 with this episode of Pod and Prejudice, covering chapters 1 through 3 of Persuasion.
Oh my God, it's been so long.
It's been so long. We haven't recorded in over a month.
I think this is the longest we've gone without recording since we started, but it was necessary for
Yes.
multiple reasons. You needed to go on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to read Persuasion. Also, I just had a crazy work year situation. So that's how that went. But I feel like we are coming back from summer vacation to say, this is Becca.
This is Molly.
We are here to talk about Jane Austen.
We are here specifically to talk about Persuasion. We don't have a fun intro for Persuasion yet.
Listeners, if you're new here, I, Becca, have read many Jane Austen novels before.
And I, Molly, am reading her for the first time through this podcast.
If you want to hear Molly read through Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, or Emma for the first time, you can listen to seasons 1, 2, or 3 of this podcast respectively, but that is not what we're doing here today.
No, today we are talking about the first 3 chapters of Persuasion.
Well, let's do a little primer on Persuasion first, because this is a fun one for us. First of all, season 4.
Season 4?
High key, we've been doing this podcast for nearly 5 years. That's crazy.
Yeah, in October it'll be 5 years.
In October, it'll be 5 years.
We should do something special.
Oh, yeah. We'll have to figure out something fun for you guys. You guys can tell us what you want for our 5-year anniversary. But before that, let's talk about Persuasion a little bit, because this one's a little fun for us. As anyone who's been listening to this podcast knows, the dynamic of our podcast always has been that I've read Jane Austen books throughout my life. I've watched many adaptations of Jane Austen's work, and Molly is obviously fresh on everything. This one's a little interesting and different because I, Becca, read Persuasion for you guys for this podcast, literally finished a week and a half ago.
Yes. So this is going to be exciting because for Becca, it's fresh off the presses.
Mm-hmm.
She just finished it. And I am obviously still reading it for the first time, but it'll be an interesting dynamic.
I'm actually so excited about this because I'm right now at a place where I've finished this book and I have so many thoughts and feelings, and I haven't really had anybody to talk about it with. And so, for me, the vehicle of this podcast has become so much more fun because now it's oh, damn, I've just finished this and I really want to say things about it, but I can't spoil anything for Molly, and not a lot of my friends have read this. And, I literally reached out to our Discord and I'm like, so guys, Persuasion.
I love it. I can't wait. I'm already, we'll get into the discussion of what I think of the book and everything, but I'm already loving it. And I think that it's going to be really fun because I think from your vibes when you were reading it, I think you really liked it and I already really like it. So I think this is going to be an excellent season.
I will neither confirm nor deny how I felt, but I will say that there's a couple things I want to lay on the table about it first. First, as we do with every book, what do you know about this book so far?
So I'll do prior to reading these chapters what
Mhm.
I thought I knew. I did in our finale episode, I made some bonkers predictions. Not bonkers. I stand by my predictions, but I don't stand by the fact that I think I gave someone the name Captain Moreland, and I think that's from a different book. I think I said that the main guy is going to be Captain Moreland. Now I know that's not the case because I recognize a name that we have heard thus far, which I will get into when we get into the thing. My prediction in that, for a refresher for anyone who didn't listen to our season 3 finale, was that Anne Elliot, the main character in Persuasion, as I see it, or as I think I see it thus far, is a nerd who lives in a cottage by the sea and meets some handsome man and has to persuade him. He has to, I don't remember who I said was going to persuade who, but right now I'm gonna say he has to persuade her to come out of her shell.
So we're certainly seeing some persuasion at some point in this book. We'll have to figure out when. We can have like a little persuasion clock.
I mean, there's already been, it's in the title.
Yes. Oh, yes. Absolutely. I mean, there's much to say. Other things I will note as we walk into this, just to frame this book a little bit. This is one of the last books that was published from Jane Austen. I believe it was published posthumously.
Mm.
And Jane Austen, I think, wrote this at a later point in her life, which is pretty interesting. And definitely, we're gonna have some fun vibes. I have a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings. I'm already in the fandom on this one. Like, I got things to say. So, like, let's get into it so I can use this podcast as a vehicle to talk about a book that I is now a hyperfixation a little.
Oh my god, I can't wait. I'm so excited. Let's do it. It's been so long since we've done this. I forget how book episodes go. I guess we just start.
No, no, you just talk
I
about
just
what
talk.
happened.
All
And
right. This is a podcast in which we talk.
not only did we go on hiatus, but we talked about adaptations of Emma for 1,000 years.
Our Emma season was 2 years long. I don't know if you all realize that, but, like, our podcast has been going on for almost 5 years, and Emma took up 2 of those years.
Well, Emma's one of, I think it's her longest book, and it's also the one with the most famous adaptations.
Yes, there are so many adaptations. Alright, so I guess we'll just do what we do best and talk about Jane Austen.
Fire away.
Okay, so in my book, also I'll note that in previous we're never gonna start.
We're never going to talk about this book, guys.
That's the joke of this season is that we're just not actually gonna talk about the book. But in previous seasons, I haven't read the footnotes because I was afraid of spoilers. This time, I am gonna read the footnotes where necessary because they actually have some helpful information that I can't really find by Googling without getting spoilers. So, anyway, there's a notes on the text before the text begins because there's like a title page that says Northanger Abbey and Persuasion. And I was like, what did I buy? But this was originally published as volumes 3 and 4 of Northanger Abbey.
That's really interesting because I'm pretty sure that's the other book that Jane Austen published posthumously.
Yes, so someone else must have been like, oh, here are these two things. Let's smoosh them together.
Oh, like a book in two halves.
Yeah, so let's get into it. Chapter 1, Sir Walter Elliot.
Setting the scene
Yes,
immediately.
he is a baronet,
Yes.
which is above a knight but below a baron.
Yes.
He loves to read the baronetage.
I cannot say the word baronetage to save my life.
We just have to say it like that, baronetage.
Baronetage. Yes, which is a book that like records the dudes who've been the baronets.
Yeah, that's its sole purpose.
Yes.
And it also like lists their families and like when their wives died, for example.
Yes. I mean, it's so like, I don't know if you have any relatives who are like really into family history.
No, no, I don't.
There are members of one of the sides of my family that are super into like recording the family history and like not to this extent, but we have like a family tree thing that is on my grandma's wall and like there's like a lot of like recorded stuff about like tracing the family history and it's not necessarily my vibe, but it's giving this, but like Regency era England.
I said no very confidently, but that was before I remembered the Facebook group that my distant cousins created and added every single person. There are hundreds of people in this Facebook group, and they are like trying to trace the history of our family. So I actually lied to you a minute ago. I do have those people in my
No,
family.
I love that because mine is like older members of my family who like are like scrolling through tomes and letters and diaries and stuff, and yours is like the cyber version.
It is, but it's still the older people. It's like grandmas on Facebook,
Yeah, I mean, maybe the listeners can confirm this, but I feel like this is like a really like a peak post 50 activity.
Yes.
Like I don't know anybody in their 30s who's like tracing their family heritage, but maybe I'm wrong. I could be corrected.
I mean, 23andMe and
That's true. That's true. We just do it in like such a millennial way.
yeah, we really do. So we get a passage about his family, which is his favorite passage. He always opens to this passage because he's a little bit conceited or a lot conceited. And we learn that his wife is dead. He has one stillborn son and 3 daughters named Elizabeth, Anne, and Mary.
This is already so telling because what do we learn immediately about this family?
Mary is married,
Mm-hmm.
and we've got 2 unmarried daughters living at home with the dad.
And
No mom,
and
and they're really rich. No, they're not, but they are nobility. And what else?
and there's no heir in the family.
Oh, right. The heir that's listed, we'll learn later, is like a cousin.
Distant cousin because all girls. Economics of Dating and Jane Austen. Hello,
The
Graham.
sound effect.
The sound effect, Graham. And also, notably, their dates of birth.
Yes, we have their dates of birth. And that really threw me, I'll be honest, because I was like, I don't know what year this is. That's backwards math. I don't know how old they're supposed to be at present. Later, we learn how old they are at present.
Well, what you learn immediately is that Mary, the youngest, is married, but she is significantly younger than her 2
Yes.
sisters, her older sisters, neither of whom is married.
Oh, yes. Mary is 7 years younger than Elizabeth.
So you know that her younger sister is of marrying age, which means she is 7 years above the bare minimum of marrying age at least, which in Austen terms is
21?
well, I was going to say old.
Oh, I thought you were asking what the marrying age was. Yes, she's old.
She is old cuz like let's say the earliest people get married in Jane Austen books is like 16.
Mhm.
That's 23 at the youngest.
Yeah, no, she's old. She's definitely old, and we'll get into a whole discussion of that in a little bit. But yeah, we do learn that right off the bat. I think it's cute that Sir Walter Elliot adds in the day and month that his wife died because he misses her, in my opinion. Or maybe he's just keeping really good track.
¿Por qué no los dos?
Yes, so true. I liked this one line I put in quotes, with all the Marys and Elizabeths they had married, and he's talking about, like, other baronets and their sons and how everybody's name is Mary or Elizabeth. I just thought that was funny.
That's true cuz Jane Austen knows her audience.
She really does. So, we have that the heir is the great-great-grandson of the 2nd Sir Walter, William Walter Elliot Esquire, this is the heir. He's gonna come in play later. Sir Walter is, oh my god, we need a sound effect for this.
1, 2, 3.
Daddy! I am so excited that we actually have a certifiable daddy.
We have a canonically hot dad in Jane Austen. I will say, giving off like unattractive, like 55-year-old himbo vibes.
Yeah, like, God, it's gonna make her come back, but Gilderoy Lockhart.
No, it's so true because actually in my head I was thinking, who would you cast as Sir Walter based on these 3 chapters alone?
I would not cast Kenneth Branagh, but he does give those vibes of, like, very self-absorbed, I'm the best. I wouldn't cast Kenneth Branagh. I think I'm giving him, like, a more polished look.
I have someone in my brain who has not played him who I think would be like perfect.
Alright, let's hear it.
Hugh Grant. Like canonically.
My heart just stopped.
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
thrilled with that.
I mean, Hugh Grant, I know you don't want to come on this podcast, but if you wanted to come on this podcast, we know he's done Jane Austen before. And like this level of self-sabotage and good-looking superficiality. Ugh.
Yeah, I'm gonna think on it, but I don't think I can do better than that, so
Listeners, let me know if you think that's just perfect or not.
yeah. So, he is super vain. It says exactly, "Few women could think more of their personal appearance than he did, nor could the valet of any new-made lord be more delighted with the place he held in society." I wanted to ask, isn't the valet just the guy who dresses the lord?
I think the implication is that he wears really luxurious clothes.
Oh, I see. He is particularly proud of his looks and his rank because he figures that's how he got his wife, who he thinks is far superior to him in character, which I think is cute. Then we learn a little bit about his late wife. It says that her judgment and conduct, if they may be pardoned the youthful infatuation which made her Lady Elliot, had never required indulgence afterward. Does this mean that she was a flirt, and then once they got married, he could kind of ignore her?
I think what this means is she fell in love,
Uh-huh.
and the man she fell in love with was a fucking idiot, and that she's not an idiot, but her one thing she did that wasn't, like, sensible in her life was marry a stupid man.
This is gonna come back later, but there's a lot of Jane Austen giving her opinion from the rocking chair in this first 3 chapters.
Yeah, there's a ton well, Jane Austen is setting us up, like, she is setting a scene in this chapter.
Yes, she really is. We learned that she wasn't the happiest person, but she enjoyed the life that she had. I'm curious about whether she was depressed because of having married a dumb man, but I don't imagine that we're gonna learn more about her than this.
I don't know what gives you that impression.
She died when the oldest 2 girls were 14 and 16, and she left them to a conceited, silly father. But she had one friend who came to live nearby and who she relied on to continue to be a role model for the girls. This is Lady Russell.
Lady Russell.
I love Lady Russell. She gives, Mrs. Weston vibes.
She's also really giving, like, I don't need a man because I got my fortune through being widowed energy, which we love.
Yes, it's interesting. Jane Austen in the rocking chair once again explains that Lady Russell, there's no expectation of her to remarry because a woman will never remarry, but everyone wonders why Sir Walter never remarried after his wife died because men are allowed to find love again.
Yeah, exactly, but he's kinda got a, "I got my girls enough here" vibe.
Yes, exactly. He says he's a cool dad.
Yeah.
It does say that Lady Elliot hoped that Lady Russell and Sir Walter would get together in the end and she would be a mother figure to the kids, but they just remained friends.
Yeah.
Mary had married a Charles Musgrove who is nothing special. She just gained some quote artificial importance, but like not enough for her dad to actually be proud of her. And Anne, I'm just going to read this quote as it is. With an elegance of mind and sweetness of character which must have placed her high with any people of real understanding, was nobody with either father or sister. And why?
Excellent question.
There could be multiple reasons, but the reason given is that she is not attractive.
I feel like that's a that's a kind of yes.
Well, I have a couple others, but primarily they talk about how she's not gotten any prettier with age.
Well, here's what happened. I think it's canonically sort of put out there that Elizabeth is like a fucking babe.
Yes.
Like, hot.
Yeah.
Elizabeth is super hot. She's keeping it tight. Um, and Anne, when they were both, like, 20
Mhm.
and 22 or whatever, they were both really hot.
Okay.
Really, really hot. The Elliots in general are, like, a hot family, but as Sir Walter and Elizabeth aged, they continue to age like fine wines, and what we're learning here is that Anne, who was, like, this insane beauty in her youth, is sort of aging quicker than her sister.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see. That makes sense because I was like, I don't they don't describe her as being ugly.
She's not ugly, she's getting older. Like, she doesn't have
Mhm.
the same skincare routine as Elizabeth.
Yeah, okay, we're gonna get into this later, but I'm gonna bring it up now, actually. Sir Walter would be so susceptible to a cult that promises eternal life.
True, and Elizabeth would go into deep credit card debt just through Korean skincare routines and Sephora products.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's good that this family doesn't have credit cards.
Do they not have credit cards?
Well, I guess they have something similar because they are in debt.
Yeah, I was
You
gonna say it's exactly what happened.
you're so right. Okay, so Lady Russell loves Anne because she reminds her of her mother. I wonder if that's also partly, like, deep down why her father doesn't can't look at her.
I think there is something very simpatico about Sir Walter and Elizabeth and their energies.
Mhm.
They're both giving off some Jenna Maroney vibes.
Mm.
If you've watched 30 Rock.
I haven't.
Okay,
We've been
this
over
is
this.
this is like a different thing, but you might have to watch like some 30 Rock, if only because the Jenna Maroney memes that we could create based on Elizabeth and Sir Walter in Persuasion.
Which character is Jenna, like, who plays her?
Jane Krakowski.
Oh.
I'll find some clips, you'll
Alright,
see.
sounds good.
Um, but Anne being sort of taking after her mother and being a little bit serious and sensible
Mhm.
is like a stick in the mud
Yeah.
compared to her father and sister and she's like, "Well, guys, maybe we shouldn't spend all that money." And they're like, "Ugh, Anne."
It's like how everyone is mean to Jerry in Parks and Rec.
Yes, kind of.
Or Toby in
Yeah,
The Office.
it's much more Toby because Anne is definitely competent,
Yeah, oh, sure.
smart,
Oh,
and
poor Jerry.
we love Jerry. Jerry has a good life. His wife loves him, but he's a fucking mess.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Whereas Anne is like not at all a mess.
She's like, "We gotta fill out this paperwork."
Yeah,
They're
she's
like,
like
"No."
surrounded by messes. And Lady Russell understands that and sees that Anne is actually like really worth her salt and adores her. But her father and sister, not so much.
Yes. Her father likes Elizabeth the most, partially because Anne has aged faster and has lost her beauty with age, and he's given up on all hope of her getting married. Mary was not married to nobility, so he's now putting all the pressure on Elizabeth to, like, keep the family name alive. Here's where we learn how old Elizabeth is. She's 29?
Which is your age.
I am 29. Now, I am a young lady, but I live in 2024. She's unmarried at 29. She is older than Charlotte Lucas.
Yes, who is the same age as Anne in this.
So Anne is 27.
No money, no,
No
prospects,
prospects.
already a burden on her parents.
And she's frightened.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that Elizabeth is even more frightened, and she's an interesting character. I'm excited to learn more about her because she is, like, getting hotter and hotter with age, and that's the only thing that can kind of forgive her father for not realizing that she needs to get out of the house. And she's kind of, like, doesn't like the pressure that's on her quietly, or at least that's the vibe I'm getting. She's, like, sick of always being the unmarried oldest daughter and, like, doing the duties of Emma Woodhouse.
Well, I get the sense, I mean, maybe you can correct me if you're. I get the sense, and we'll talk about this, that Jane Austen wants us to think Elizabeth wants to get married.
Mhm.
I mean, we'll talk about it, but she's given off a different kind of vibe.
Mhm.
But there is a sense, I think, of like people who don't want to work unless they're like famous. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like you want to start at the top and stay at the top.
Yeah.
Like Elizabeth wants to marry, but Elizabeth only wants to marry a very specific kind of guy.
Yes, even one could say a very specific guy.
She's looking for a man in finance.
Trust fund,
6'5".
blue eyes.
And who does she set her sights on?
William Walter Elliot Esquire, her cousin.
Yes.
I wrote, if this is her goddamn cousin, in my book, knowing full well it was her goddamn cousin.
It's always her fucking cousin. Are you
But,
kidding?
but like for real? I lost my spot. Okay, here we are.
She's too upset about the cousin.
No, I went up, I saw a line that I had written that we didn't get to, but that he thinks Anne is haggard, Mary is coarse, and Lady Russell has crow's feet. He's like, the women around me are all aging so fast, except for my beautiful, ageless Elizabeth.
Yeah, and Sir Walter does not care about you unless you're hot.
Yes, and eternally youthful because he's in a cult.
Yes.
Anyway, back to William Walter Esquire.
Maybe Gwyneth should play Sir Walter, but let's go on.
Oh my god. Oh my god, that's too good. Wow. So William Walter Elliot Esquire has disappointed Elizabeth. How? Well, they've been intended for each other since birth. And when they met, Elizabeth was like, yes, you're the one. And she invited him to Kellynch Hall. But he never came. The next spring, she meets him again in town. Again, she invites him to Kellynch Hall. And again, he never came. The next thing they hear about him is that he's gotten married to a rich woman of inferior birth, thereby purchasing his independence.
Interesting moment.
Yes, I support it.
William?
I do. I support what he did. I think,
Okay.
married. I think that he has a complicated home life. This is
Okay.
my prediction for him, where he's been intended for this person since birth that he doesn't know. It's going to keep the money in the family. and he doesn't wanna be beholden to whatever parent of his is trying to get him to marry his cousin. And he was like, maybe he married for love, maybe he married for money, maybe it's like a situation where he was just like the first hot available non-noble woman that he could find. I'm hoping it's for love and that he's misunderstood. That's what I think happened. But what I don't approve of is that he then went and talked shit about the entire Elliot family behind their backs and spread shit about them, which is what he did, and I was curious about why he did that because it
Well
didn't seem like they did anything to him.
well, why would he?
I don't know. It was truly one of my biggest questions coming out of these 3 chapters. I was like, "Why did he talk shit?"
Well, I think
Oh, well, maybe he was saying that they were vain and conceited, and
I mean, that's a thought.
I hadn't thought of that.
Well, you know what I'm gonna do?
Neither confirm nor deny. Oh, we also learn in this little section about Sir William Walter Elliot Esquire. Is he a lawyer? Esquire?
Yes,
Okay.
Esquire means lawyer.
Is that his wife dies in 1814, which is the present, and Elizabeth is currently wearing mourning ribbons for him, or for her rather. So devastating for him. And she would have forgiven him the disgrace of his first marriage because he doesn't have kids. There's nothing to like perpetuate the marriage. Like they can all kind of forget it happened, except for the shit talking about her family. They haven't spoken to him since the snubbery. They've ceased all communications. So that's where we stand with William Walter Esquire. William Walter Elliot Esquire.
You can just say William.
All right, William.
Yeah.
Great. I'm going to
'Cause-
confuse William and Walter.
So the way I've been doing it is William and Sir Walter.
Okay, William, Sir Walter, and Shep, who we'll meet soon.
Oh, Shep.
So Elizabeth is at home, sitting in the house, bored, as that old video from early pandemic days said. She's also stressed because, as we briefly mentioned earlier, they are running low on money.
Someone did give them credit cards.
And they maxed them out big time.
Sure did.
Lady Elliot had been the person keeping Sir Walter within his means. And when she died, all sense died with her. And he just went on a spending spree.
Yes, he did.
He thinks that he's not to be blamed because it's simply impossible for him to be as hot as he is and spend less. He has to upkeep his appearances.
Yeah, and the appearance goes to more than just his literal aesthetics.
Yeah, it's his house, it's his grounds, it's his rank.
Yes, his nobility.
Yes. But it's gotten really bad and he can no longer conceal it from Elizabeth. So he starts asking how they can reach French, which means to reduce costs or spending in response to economic difficulty.
I mean, who among us?
We all are retrenching all the time. Now, Elizabeth is a woman, and therefore she gets right on the case. This is what Jane Austen says. She's like, she uses her womanly tact or whatever, and she starts making a plan. She's like, okay, we'll stop giving to unnecessary charities, which is like, is that really the first thing that you like? You're one of the wealthy families. That's what you do in this time. You give to charity.
Yeah, literally, like half of Emma is her walking to go feed the poor,
Yeah.
and it's not a very big cost. It's like, not to get political, but it's like when governments are like, yeah, let's cut spending, and then they cut the arts program. I'm like, that didn't do anything. You just
Right.
ruined everybody's good time.
Yeah, yeah. She says, we'll stop that. We'll stop refurnishing the drawing room. And we won't bring a present to Anne, which I was like, what present? And then I realized they're on their yearly trip to London. And they go to London every year and they don't bring Anne.
Yeah, they're really fucking mean to Anne.
Anne is the ultimate middle child.
Yes.
I was describing the book to Mel after I finished the first chapter. And she was like, can you give me like the 5-sentence spark notes? And I was like, this is about the ultimate middle child.
Anne Elliot, ultimate middle child.
Yeah, they literally just forget about her. So this year, they're just like, we're not going to bring her back anything from London. He's like, I can't sell my land. There's only a small part of the estate that's not entailed. And anyway, like, I'll mortgage, but I will not stoop to sell. So they call in Mr. Shepherd, who I'm calling Shep, who is their agent / lawyer / friend.
Lawyer / friend.
Okay.
And Lady Russell, who is friend / wife friend, platonic
Yeah.
wife.
Mama.
Yeah. Mama
Yeah.
bear.
And that brings us to chapter 2. Pod and Prejudice is sponsored this week by the Ballarat National Theatre in Australia. If you're reading along with us, wouldn't you just love to listen to an audiobook version of Persuasion where a full cast of actors tells the story alongside original music and sound design? Well, the Ballarat National Theatre has created a 13-episode audiobook podcast version of Persuasion. You may remember them from back in 2020 when they released a Pride and Prejudice adaptation in the same style. This audiobook is made entirely by volunteers at a not for profit theater company with a cast of 20 actors voicing the whole thing. It's true to the text without omissions, additions, or any changes, and they've added an original music score to match Austen's words and set the scene. The audiobook is available for free on all major podcast platforms, and you can head to www.bnt.org.au for all streaming links. They've just released episode 7, so they're a little ahead of us, which means you can listen to their podcast alongside ours. It's basically a match made in heaven. Again, that's Ballarat National Theatre's production of Persuasion, which you can find at www.bnt.org.au. And now, back to the show. So Shep doesn't want to disappoint Sir Walter. And he's basically like, I defer to Lady Russell.
Okay, it's important to think about this in this circumstance. Mr. Shepherd is not of Sir Walter's rank,
No.
and Lady Russell kind of is. She's a lady, so she is of nobility. So she has a little bit more pull here to talk, but they're also very sensitive to the fact that Sir Walter is a delicate boy.
Yes, he is a delicate boy. Lady Russell's slower at decision making, and particularly in this case because she's got dueling interests because she wants to, on one hand, protect Sir Walter's feelings and not blow him up. But on the other hand, she's also smart and needs to make a good financial decision for them. She is prejudiced on their behalf because of their ancestry, and she's a little bit
We are identifying a flaw in our girl, Lady Russell, right
who's
now.
otherwise perfect,
Yeah.
but she's a little classist,
Yes, indeed.
as they all are.
Indeed. And I forgot about this. She's the widow of a knight.
Yes.
So she does have some noble stuff going on because I think knights are like just a step below like a baronet.
Yeah, it's literally knight, baronet, baron. So he's got a little seniority on her, or whatever you would call that. But they're still in the same class, basically.
Yeah, they both have like the noble blood,
Yes.
which protects people from things like poor financial decisions a lot of the time in this time period.
Right. So she consults Anne because nobody else thought to ask Anne what she thinks. And Anne is like, yeah, we have to go in 100%. Let's get out of debt as quickly as possible, cut spending wherever we can. And Lady Russell is like, yeah, we have to just be able to convince your dad. And if we can follow your plan, we'll be out of debt in 7 years.
I can relate to the Elliots here because I too understand that I should stop like ordering takeout and buying coffee. And yet,
But in the grand scheme of things, ordering takeout and buying coffee are very similar to bringing bread to the poor in this.
no, they're not.
In terms of what the amount you're spent, like that's not your rent. You know, like you're not in an exorbitantly priced high-rise apartment building.
No, that's true. And I mean, I get what you're saying. I think like charity is a better expenditure than coffee.
Yes, no, I was saying it in terms of the dent that'll make
Yes,
in cutting it out. So like they're taking the Elizabeth was like, let's take the easiest thing for us to cut out, which is bringing a basket of bread to the poor, and that'll save us.
Elizabeth is cutting out the things she doesn't care about. Like,
sure.
like that's the difference is that like Elizabeth wants to keep going to London. Elizabeth wants to keep like fine dining and going to balls and buying fancy silks. She doesn't care about bringing bread to the poor. Like it's not like the easiest expenditure to cut out. It's the least painful one for her to cut out.
Sure. And cutting out coffee would be very painful.
Exactly. Well, I wouldn't cut out coffee. I just like should make it at home more often than I do. But like they are like, this is like, Anne's like, okay, so we have to start with cutting the trip to Miami. And then we're going to sell one of the cars. And we're going to also maybe set a budget for where you can order food from. And maybe you don't order from Nobu anymore. And Lady Russell's like, ooh, that's going to be a lot for them to take in. And so Lady Russell's like, how about we just cut it down to one trip to Miami? And will also trade in one of the cars for something a little bit more modest and maybe Nobu once a month instead of once a week.
Yes, that's a
and
very good way of putting it.
and still Walter and Elizabeth are like, absolutely not.
Yeah, he says that he would rather leave than stay at Kellynch Hall on such disgraceful terms because he is a weenie. And Shep is like, "Wait, that's an idea. What if you leave?" And he becomes persuaded, and there is a footnote that says it's in the title.
Oh, amazing. What's the actual footnote?
Perfectly persuaded, entirely convinced, the first of many diverse uses of the concept of persuasion in the book.
Indeed.
So he becomes persuaded that nothing can be done about their budget without a change of abode. He thinks that Sir Walter is trying to live up to the ancient dignity of Kellynch Hall and like upkeeping this rank and status. And if he's in a smaller house, maybe he could live within his means. Sir Walter is convinced, and so we are going to go on an adventure. The next question is where? Anne wants to stay in the country to be near Lady Russell and Mary, but in classic Elliot fashion, Anne is ignored and they decide to go to Bath instead. Sir Walter, quote, had at first thought more of London, but Mr. Shepherd felt he could not be trusted in London and had been skillful enough to dissuade him from it.
That's I mean, it's perfect.
Yeah, it's amazing. But ultimately, he was like, we need a big fish, small pond mentality. You can't be a small fish in a big pond because then you're going to be trying to be a big fish in a big pond and you're going to spend money.
Yeah, it's a cheap place to live luxuriously.
Yes, exactly. Anne had wanted to stay in the country, as I said, and Lady Russell had opposed this idea because she thought it would be embarrassing for Sir Walter to move from a big house to a small one with all the same neighbors. People would talk. We know that Jane Austen time is gossip town. Now, Anne hates Bath.
Oh, Anne hates Bath.
Yeah. She went to school there after her mother's death for 3 years, but that's not all. She visited once afterwards and was, quote, not in perfectly good spirits then. I wrote in my notes, what the fuck happened in Bath? But we don't know yet. Now, Lady Russell thinks that Anne needs to get out there and expand her society. She thinks that'll be good for her. It mentions that danger will be avoided by her passing all the warm months with her at Kellynch Lodge. Does that mean that Anne is going to go back and forth between Bath and Kellynch Hall?
Yeah, basically spend her summers with Lady Russell.
Okay. And Lady Russell doesn't live at Kellynch Hall, but she's there all the time, or
I think Kellynch Lodge is like near Lady Russell.
okay. So like she'd still be in the area.
Yeah.
Now, I have a word to define that I didn't know. Engrafted, which is a verb.
And how is it used?
The undesirableness of any other house in the same neighborhood for Sir Walter was certainly much strengthened by one part, and a very material part of the scheme, which had been happily engrafted on the beginning, which means incorporated in a firm or permanent way. So part of the plan is that they're going to leave and they're going to let Kellynch Hall. And Sir Walter is like, this fucking sucks. I do not want to rent my house out.
But it is a pretty easy way to make some money to rent out your massive manor.
Yes, exactly.
Now you might recall Netherfield Park is let at last.
Oh, yes, I remember.
Yes.
Yes, I was very excited to see that. The fact that they're going to have to let Kellynch Hall is going to be kept a secret. And Sir Walter even refuses to advertise the house. He says, I just want someone to spontaneously ask to live here. I wrote down that I'm really praying that the person who rents the house is our handsome young man, whoever that may be in this book. Another good reason for them to move out, in Lady Russell's opinion, is that, quote, Elizabeth had lately been forming an intimacy which she wished to see interrupted.
Gay?
It's Mr. Shepherd's daughter who has just returned from an unprosperous marriage, but with 2 kids. Now, I need to know, husband dead or divorced?
Husband dead, I think.
Okay, because unprosperous, like, normally or earlier in the book, they used that to mean no children.
Yes, but here she does have children.
She just didn't get any money from his death.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those circumstances where your husband leaves you with not a lot, so you move back in with your dad.
And your 2 kids.
Yeah.
Unfortunate for her. Her name is Lady
Mrs.
Mrs.
Clay.
Clay. and she is befriended, quote unquote, Elizabeth.
I had the same exact reaction. Like our patrons are gonna hear that in my reaction where I'm like, this is a gay couple.
Yes, absolutely. Like, why else would we be trying to separate them? I mean, I can think of some reasons, but I just, yep, gay.
I mean, yeah, I think that Jane Austen is getting at the fact that like Elizabeth is aristocratic and Mrs. Clay is a connection beneath her,
Mhm.
but at the same time, gay.
Yes, exactly. Now, Lady Russell is not really one who is able to influence Elizabeth. They don't have a very good relationship. Not like it's a bad relationship, but it says, quote, "She seemed to love her rather because she would love her than because Elizabeth deserved it." So basically, she's just like trying her best to help out, but Elizabeth doesn't really want to hear it. Lady Russell had at times tried to get Elizabeth and her dad to bring Anne to London. She's tried to give Elizabeth advice, but she has just never been listened to, particularly when it comes to Mrs. Clay. In her opinion, Elizabeth is choosing Mrs. Clay over her own sister, Anne. And Lady Russell thinks that removing the Elliots to Bath is going to be great for everyone involved. Which brings us to chapter 3.
Mhm.
We learn that the Navy is coming. The officers, the officers.
Oh boy, the Navy.
And Mr. Shepherd says they will all be wanting a home. So I think our tenant is going to be one of the Navy. Sir Walter thinks that any admiral would be lucky to live at Kellynch Hall. And Shep thinks that naval officers are very desirable tenants. And he hints that since Sir Walter is of so much consequence, word might get out of his trying to let the house, and then the officers might apply to live there. Basically, one, flattering him and being like, oh, you're so important, like people are going to hear. And two, I think that he's out there telling people and trying to cover up for himself. Sir Walter thinks that the men in the Navy would be surprised to find themselves there. He's like, this place is too good for them, basically. And Mrs. Clay is like, yeah, 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 but they'd be really good tenants because they're very neat and careful and they would take care of the gardens. And then Sir Walter says, well, if I do let the house, like I would restrict their use of the pleasure grounds. I had to ask, do you know what the difference between the park and the pleasure grounds is?
I do not.
Cool, because he seems like he's going to be like, well, they can stay here, but they can't touch this, this, and this.
Yeah, that's exactly
Yeah.
right.
Mr. Shepherd's response to this interaction confused me a little bit. But I think what he's saying is like he'd be around to keep an eye on things so nobody would like break anything.
What page are you looking at for that?
Page 20 in my copy, he says, in all these cases, there are established usages which make everything plain and easy between landlord and tenant. Your interest, Sir Walter, is in pretty safe hands. Depend upon me for taking care that no tenant has more than his just rights. I venture to hint that Sir Walter Elliot cannot be half so jealous for his own as John Shepherd will be for him. So basically, he's saying, I'm going to keep track of things.
Yeah, and make sure that like the people don't like overstep, that like it is still your house. They're staying in it.
They're not throwing parties.
Exactly. And I think there's some really interesting stuff here that Sir Walter says about Navy. He says he finds the Navy offensive, essentially. And one of the points he says, as being the means of bringing persons of obscure birth into undue distinction and raising men to honors which their fathers and grandfathers never dreamt of. And then he combines that with the fact that guys in the Navy are ugly.
Because they're weather worn.
Yeah.
They're weather beaten. Their skin has gotten tan and leathery and like wrinkles faster. He tells a story about someone named Admiral Baldwin. He was hanging out with his friend Sir Basil Morley, and Basil turns to him and asks how old he thinks Admiral Baldwin is, and he's like, I don't know, 60. And Basil's like, he's 40. And he never forgot that. Again, eternal life cult.
Okay, I said Hugh Grant, but now I'm becoming more and more convinced that Gwyneth Paltrow should play Sir Walter.
It's uncanny, actually.
And I think we should have a poll on our Instagram when this episode premieres.
Yeah. So Mrs. Clay then goes on to say that not everyone is meant to be handsome. And everyone who works at all, even if they're a lawyer or like a shoemaker, like they're all exerting themselves in some way and therefore age faster than those like them who can just relax and repose all day. And basically, we should all retire or be born rich. Very shortly after this conversation, one Admiral Croft applies for the house. He had met Shep at the quarter sessions at Taunton, which are local courts that are traditionally held at 4 set times each year in the Kingdom of England. And he had accidentally heard that Kellynch Hall was to be let. And he knew that Mr. Shepherd was friends with Sir Walter, and so he introduced himself to him on purpose. I think that Shep had already that this all happened. He let slip about the house, and then he breached the conversation about the Navy because of that.
Well, there's some telling stuff in here about why a naval officer is such a good tenant. One thing, they are rich
Mhm.
and like rich without an estate of their own, generally,
Mhm.
unless you're Colonel Brandon, obviously. But the other thing being, given the timing of this book, there's a telling line here where they talk about how Admiral Croft was a rear admiral who had been involved in the Trafalgar action, which I believe is the Napoleonic Wars.
Mhm.
So the war is over and the boy's coming home.
Right.
So there's a lot of guys flooding the market,
Yes.
looking for big houses to basically set their mark on the world and get this like fancy little lifestyle going now that they've made all this money at the war and now that they've raised their social status through war to come home and buy or let houses from nobility that is, desperately in need of the funds.
Yeah, I'm wondering now, like, what happened to the previous owners of Netherfield?
Great question. Well, it says let at last.
So it's been sitting empty. Maybe they're dead.
No, because I mean, the way that it works, I mean, it might just be someone who has a bigger estate elsewhere, or it could be someone who's poor. There's a lot of reasons to let an estate.
Yeah.
You can't sell it.
Right. Oh, right. Because of the fee tail, the end tail.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is that Mr. Shepherd had already gone to the naval officers and been like, guess what? And they were like, yes, please. And then he came back and he was like, so naval officers would be a good tenant, huh?
That's exactly correct. He was like, yeah, he knows all these guys are flooding into the country, and he's like, ooh, there's definitely a good opportunity for a tenant here. He finds Admiral Croft, who's a rich boy, and he's like, hey, so what if we did like a naval officer? And Sir Walter's like, ugh, they're ugly and poor. Like,
So Admiral Croft is from a gentleman's family, supposedly, and Anne somehow knows exactly who he is, what his rank is, where he's been deployed. She just like blurts it out.
so interesting. How do you know that, Anne?
I was like, Anne, how do you know that? And this is only the first time she said something about him. Sir Walter's response is, I take it for granted that his face is as orange as the cuffs and capes of my livery. I thought was hilarious. And then Mr. Shepherd says, yeah, well, he's weather beaten, but he's attractive and he's very like a gentleman in manners. And he says that Admiral Croft knows there will be limitations on the land. He would be glad of the deputation, which means like the opportunity to shoot game, but he doesn't need to because he never shoots anything. He sometimes holds a gun, but he's never killed. I don't know if that means he's a bad shot or he just like doesn't do it. He's more of an indoor boy.
I think he's more of a sea boy.
Oh yeah, a sea boy.
Yeah.
Sure. He's married but has no children, which we like because a woman will keep the house in order and children are messy. So this is the perfect situation. Also, the lady is lovely and she knows more about terms and taxes than Admiral Croft. And she even has some connections in the area, we learn. She's the sister to a
Oh, does she?
gentleman, yes, who used to live at Monkford, but we can't remember his name. Mr. Shepherd's like, oh, like I know a story about a farmer's man breaking onto his property and stealing apples, but I can't remember his name.
And then suddenly Anne, just from out of the blue, I think you're talking about Mr. Wentworth.
And then I wrote, fuck yes.
Yeah, the record scratch from us. Like, I think both of us at the same time being like, we know that name.
Yes, because we are on Jane Austen Instagram. We know that name. But how does Anne know?
It's a great question.
Again, where are you getting your information from? Sir Walter's like, oh, you misled me by calling him a gentleman. He's a nobody, quite unconnected.
He's such an asshole.
He sucks.
You love him.
Yes, I do.
Problematic daddy for the win.
Yes, he's hot and annoying.
Which makes him hotter. Is when someone's a little annoying and hot at the same time.
Yeah.
No, that's actually completely untrue. Sometimes people are so annoying that even if they're hot, they're just not hot at all.
Yes, but I think that, well, we'll see. We'll see how this progresses. I'm not going to like fully be like, yes, he can do no wrong because he can do a lot of wrong. He's so mean.
He's so mean to Anne.
But he is hot and because he's a certifiable daddy, we have to stand.
He is canonically daddy.
Yeah.
Daddy.
So Mr. Shepherd's like, well, okay, like I'm not going to talk about his nobility anymore because whatever. But eventually, Sir Walter is persuaded to let the Crofts see the estate. He decides that letting the house to Admiral Croft would be good because an admiral's situation in life is high enough, but not too high. He's not a mister, he's an admiral, and an admiral speaks his own consequence and at the same time never makes a baronet look small. So he's doing charity by letting someone who's below him let the house, but also
No,
he's
it's very specific because he's like, he's enough of a rank to be impressive, but
Mhm.
not enough of a rank to be competition for me.
Exactly.
It's like a very mean girl thing to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Elizabeth is like, "Yes, this is a great idea." And so Mr. Shepherd goes off to tell him to come see the place. No sooner had such an end been reached than Anne, who had been a most attentive listener to the whole, left the room to seek the comfort of cool air for her flushed cheeks,
Ah!
and as she walked along a favorite grove, said with a gentle sigh, "A few months more, and he, perhaps, may be walking here."
End of chapter.
What?
First of all, I wrote in my book, OMFG, this is so hot. What's the history?
I was like, did they have a steamy affair?
Who's to say?
Who's to say? Whom, Stephen?
Yeah.
Lots of predictions about that.
That brings us to Becca's study questions. And before we get into Becca's study questions, we have patron study questions.
Ow, ow.
Listeners, just as a reminder, if you want to subscribe to our Patreon at the $15 tier, you can submit a question, which you can do through a Google Doc that Molly will post every week that we have an episode airing. So make sure, we might miss your questions otherwise. Make sure that you submit through the Google Doc and we will ask your questions on the air. So with that in mind, we have a couple questions. Joanna asks, in the opening paragraphs, Austen focuses the reader's attention on the fragment of the book Baronetage. Why?
Baronetage.
Baronetage.
So we talked about this a lot at the beginning of our episode, but it gives us the rundown of the family history. We know who's in the family, who's married, who's not, who's dead, and also like who our cousin is, who's the heir, and it shows our like we are part of the family too. Our rank in society. We're in the baronetage.
Yes. I think immediately it sets a scene that we're in a noble family,
Mhm.
which we actually haven't been in one of
Mm-mm.
our books yet.
No, we've just been in like landed gentry.
We've been
Or
in a lot of landed gentry, and obviously we are in and out of discussing the nobility. Obviously, you have Lady Catherine de Bourgh,
Mhm.
you have Lord Middleton, and John Middleton. He's a lord, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because Lady Middleton.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Lord Middleton, and I mean, I don't think anybody in Emma is noble, but you take my point that they get sprinkled in. But so it's interesting that in our current story we start with like immediately we are dealing with a noble family, and then almost immediately after that we are dealing with an impoverished noble family.
Yeah.
And setting the scene with who Sir Walter and Elizabeth are immediately shown to be, you get Jane Austen already doing her damnedest to shit on the noble class,
Yes.
which she has done in a couple of her books so far, but this one is like pretty explicit and immediate.
Yeah. It's fun that we're making fun of this class and shitting on them, but also we're getting a little bit of Jane Austen in there with the hating Bath but living there. Did she hate it? I mean, I know that she lived there and was unhappy.
Yeah, I think that we'll get into this a little bit further, but I have some real questions about how much of Anne is Austen. Obviously, she's very close to her sister Cassandra,
Mhm.
but otherwise, an unmarried woman in Bath of great beauty and a sound mind and a spendthrift father.
Mm.
I have questions about how much of this is Jane Austen projecting herself into her story. And that's like from the 4 books we've read so far, this one is the one where I've really been like,
Mhm.
hmm, hmm.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Yes.
Hmm. Okay. Study question number 2. Megan R asks, the first 3 chapters of Persuasion is the longest Austen has done using just narrative voice. Could you tell the difference and what did you think of it this change?
When you say narrative voice, does that mean like we're not having conversations between people. It's like, this is just narrator.
Yes, and I
Yeah.
think it's the Jane Austen in the rocking chair.
Yes, yes. Oh, yes. So, yes, I noticed, and it gives us more of an idea of what you were just saying of what Jane Austen's opinion is on these people and what we're supposed to think of these people. So we know who we're supporting right away because we love an underdog, and we know who we're annoyed by right away because we're getting, like, and that could also be that these are getting easier to read with
Mhm.
time, but I feel like I have a better idea of, like, who's gonna be the hero and who's not. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not gonna fall in love with Elizabeth and Mr. Sir Walter, but I think that I don't like that they're mean to our girl, so, like, from an external perspective, like, we're getting everything from a third person perspective.
Yeah, I would only add to that, we have a lot of Delulu going on in
Mhm,
the book right now, and one thing I think that's kind of captured by these first few chapters, and I don't think this is a spoiler to say, is that Anne is quiet
mhm,
and introspective,
and people don't listen to her when she
and
does
people
talk.
don't listen to her when she does talk. So we need the narrator to kind of give us an impression of who we're dealing with because Anne's not gonna give it to us.
Right, so it's interesting, like, does Anne feel the way about her family that we are meant to feel about them from the narrator? Like, is Anne kind of the narrator also, or is that Jane Austen?
Who's to say?
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm.
Hmm. Last patron study question. Emily asks, best guess so far on who the villain of the story is slash will be.
Um, I feel like William Walter Elliot Esquire is gonna be a quote unquote villain just because he went around talking shit about them for like, well, I guess for the reason that they're conceited and vain. And honestly, again, I support him in thinking that because, like, they are, but don't talk shit about our friends. I don't know if they're our friends yet. So then the question is, are the Elliots going to be kind of villains? So right now I'm a little bit torn between, like, Sir Walter and William Walter Esquire, Elliot Esquire, the senior third.
I love that you give him like 8 different names every time you say his name.
Yeah, yeah. That's gonna be a running joke, I can tell, because I can't get
Incredible.
it right.
Yeah. So Shirley Temple, William Elliot.
Yeah.
All right. So now Becca's study questions.
And a huge thank you to our patrons who submitted study questions for this week.
So what do we immediately learn about the main characters in the story, and what does it tell us about Anne?
So we learn that they are, well, that her family, her older family, is hot and conceited and vain. And we learn that Anne is aging like a normal human being, as is her sister, Mary, who's married. Mary is married. And I think that the big personalities we have going on with her dad and her sister kind of shrink her, and she doesn't get listened to. And because she doesn't get listened to, she doesn't talk much or doesn't pipe up, but she's very pragmatic and practical. And I know that Lady Russell listens to her and values her opinion and thinks that she and Elizabeth should be friends.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think first of all, we're in a family where they come from greatness and are falling,
Mhm.
devolving, and clearly like started at a different place at the start of her life and then like devolved downward through her life through no fault of her own. And I think you get the sense that she's in a house where she's profoundly misunderstood
Mhm.
and lonely and quiet and sad as a result.
Yeah.
And so you kind of get this from the perspective of her father and sister who are cruel in a lot of ways to her, but they're so ridiculous in these chapters, and they're such a caricature of the excesses of
Yeah.
nobility that you immediately get a sense of what Anne's up against to
Mhm.
be herself in
Mhm.
these moments.
Yeah.
So it makes you already endeared to poor sweet Anne,
Yeah, I really like her.
our quintessential middle child. What is Jane Austen doing showing a man of nobility in this state?
By in this state, do you mean in his fallen state
In
or
his fallen state.
um I think it heightens the fact that he is so oblivious to what actual people go through and, like, what the people in lower classes than him experience in their day-to-day life, that he's like, and it also heightens his need for superficial status symbols, because he can't afford them anymore. Yeah, and just that he gets put in a position where he has to move out and let his apartment, and his estate, and he is still like, "I would rather leave than give up both of my horses."
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Joanna, her question kind of got at this as well, but we open with him obsessing over his baronetage.
Yeah.
And so you see him cling to this status he has really hard and let the world around him burn because of where he is in society, class wise, and nothing else, not monetary considerations, not practical considerations, not family considerations, just his status and frankly, his looks.
Yes.
And that gives you an idea right away. I mean, Jane is clearly, like I said, taking a massive dump on the noble class here and capturing something very real that was happening in England, which is like noble people living in excess and losing their money because of it. And these estates kind of draining them because they're expensive and you can't sell them.
Mhm.
So it's interesting. We're going to skip around a little bit because my questions later kind of relate to this. We hear a lot about the Navy in this chapter. What is the Navy compared to this, like Sir Walter and his story?
Lower. They're like new money, right?
Yeah.
They're not the reason he hates them is because it allows for social mobility, and he does not think that people should be allowed to move between classes. He wants people to be
Hmm.
born into their status and stay there, and with the Navy, you can elevate your own rank when, in his words, like, your dad would never be caught dead with his dad, and now you're of the same rank.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. It waters down the noble class to have guys be able to rise up. And Jane Austen already is juxtaposing the noblemen with the men who work for their money
Mhm.
here, which is really interesting because Jane Austen's not usually like so ready to talk about moving social classes, but these guys are in the
Yeah.
Navy, and I mean, there's some outside stuff here, like mentions of the East Indies, where like I want to go on a whole rant about how when you were an Englishman in this time period, you could use colonialism to like pull yourself up in like your local society by going abroad and being British abroad and therefore like higher up than everybody else. It's a whole classist imperialist bullshit thing that I think Austen touches on, but does so, and I without spoiling anything, a little bit more effectively later than in this book. But she's clearly already setting up a difference between a nobleman and a navy man, a sailor,
Mhm.
and how they come into wealth and what they do with wealth already.
Yeah, definitely.
So going back one question, we are starring an unmarried 27-year-old woman and her unmarried 29-year-old sister.
Unreal.
How does this immediately make this book different than all the other books that we've read?
Well, these people are our age.
Yes.
Like, at long last,
Yes.
someone we can actually relate to, but on the other hand, like, in all of the other books, everyone's 21, 22, 23, and talking about how old they are and how they have to get married, and in this book, that doesn't seem to be at the forefront of these people's minds, not in an Emma way. Like, I think that Elizabeth really does want to get married, and she wants to get married to a person of high status like herself, like you said, and I don't know how Anne feels about marriage, but these 2 women are saving like, Sir Walter doesn't think that Anne's ever gonna get married, and he's not pressed about it. All of his pressure is on Elizabeth to marry the right person, and because she is hot, he thinks that she still has a shot.
Yeah.
But she is elderly compared to our other heroines.
Yeah, and I wanna note a couple things here. One, obviously, because Mary is married,
Mhm.
the sort of pressure of, like, unmarried girls is, like, off in this book in a certain way where they at least have somewhere to go if their father died,
Sure,
and they
but
wouldn't.
I think about I guess Mary is, like, what, 23, 21.
Yeah,
She's
somewhere around
7 years
there.
younger, so she's 20.
20.
She's 7 years younger than Elizabeth.
Oh, so 22.
Yeah. So she is 22. I guess what I'm thinking of, like, Lady Catherine de Bourgh being so shocked that Lydia's already married. Or no, that she's out.
Well,
All 5 out at once.
the reason Catherine de Bourgh was shocked was not that she was out at such a young age necessarily, but because all 5 were out at once, it's much easier to marry your daughters off one at a time.
I see, I
Yeah.
see. I see. Okay, so but in any event, the youngest sister being the first one to get married seems odd, because normally I feel like you would do it in order of age. It's interesting. I'm curious, like, how big a part of this story marriage is gonna be. This is gonna drive my mom crazy, all of our saying "Mary is married" because I say those 2 words exactly the
Oh,
same.
because it's Mary, marry, and Mary?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Mary is married.
And she's very merry about
Yes,
it.
exactly, and, I'm excited to get to know Mary, though, because anyway, sorry, mom, but I'm curious, like, I can only picture our nerd girl Mary, so, like, I'm curious about this Mary.
We'll have to see.
Yeah.
I would also just add on the fact you're right, like the stakes are different because they're so old. Because the prospects for marriage are much, much lower at this point. So they're kind of like, I mean, Elizabeth lives in Delulu world, but Anne is living in this world of like, I know this is my life now.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like, because it does say her dad literally doesn't think she's gonna get married and, like, isn't trying to push her out there, does she and I guess we'll find out later, but does she go to balls and is she in society and is she trying to get married? And does she want to? And if she doesn't, is she gonna become a Miss Bates who's just alone and unmarried and living with her dad?
Again, because her sister's married, she can't become Miss Bates.
Because she could go live with her sister?
Yeah.
Alright, when I say Miss Bates, I mean not in like, becoming destitute. I just mean being
Chatty and lonely.
chatty and lonely,
Yeah.
kind of ridiculed. I think that she doesn't deserve that. So, we'll find out.
We'll find out. Last question. Who's he?
I have no idea, but here are my theories.
Okay, give him to me.
He, meaning Mr. Wentworth, I think, because that's the okay. I have heard the name Wentworth, as had you before you read this book. So I am assuming he is going to be important. He's not the one letting the house. His sister and her husband are, but because she knows so much about him and was pointing out, "Oh, well, he was in this area when he was on duty," I think that he is he. Who is he to her? My theories are thus: 1, they had a steamy affair many years ago. 2, they're having an ongoing affair and they need a reason for him to come visit. 3, she's had a crush on him her whole life, but he doesn't know who she is.
What am I going to do?
Neither confirm nor deny.
I'm going to do neither of those things, but I'm glad we have them on the record.
Yes.
That leads us to our standbys. Funniest quote?
I said 2 of them already, so I will say this last one. We're talking about Admiral Croft's wife. "A lady without a family was the very best preserver of furniture in the world."
That should be without dogs as well, from my experience.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Questions moving forward.
Why does Anne hate Bath? Is that where she had a steamy affair with Mr. Wentworth? Who knows? Why was William Walter, Esquire Admiral III, the worst? What was he saying about them? And what's wrong with Mrs. Clay?
I think just beneath Elizabeth. Well, we'll get there. We'll get there.
And gay.
Gay. All right, listeners, we clearly got really excited to talk about this book again. For next week, we're going to be reading chapters 4 and 5 of Persuasion. And by next week, I mean next episode, so 2 weeks from now. So until next time, stay proper.
And don't max out your credit card.
Goodbye.
Pod and Prejudice is edited by Molly Burdick and audio produced by Graham Cook. Our show art is designed by Torrance Brown. Our show is transcribed by SpeechDocs Podcast Transcription. For transcripts and to learn more about our team, check out our website at podandprejudice.com. To keep up with the show, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Pod and Prejudice. If you love what you hear, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/podandprejudice to see how you can support us, or just drop us a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.